The Iron Maw dropped out of sublight like a predator breaching still water. Captain Draza'Kol stood at the center of his bridge, all four arms folded across his broad chest, and watched the human freighter resolve on the tactical display. MV Distant Shore, a mid-range cargo hauler, lightly armored, running a standard trade lane trajectory through the lawless corridor between the Orion Spur shipping routes. No military escort, no convoy, just a lone freighter hauling cargo through space that belonged to whoever was strong enough to take it. Draza'Kol had done this 214 times. He gave the order with a flick of his upper left hand. The Iron Maw's EMP array discharged in a focused pulse that crossed the gap between the two ships in less than a second. On the tactical display, the Distant Shore's engine signature guttered and died. Her running lights flickered. Her weapons, and Draza'Kol used the term generously, because the freighter's defensive array amounted to two-point defense turrets that couldn't have scratched the Iron Maw's hull plating, went dark. His vocal sac expanded slightly with satisfaction, amplifying his voice as he addressed the bridge crew. Boarding party, standard approach. 20 of his crew assembled at the forward airlock. Korrathi pirates, every one of them. Thick-bodied, four-armed, their mottled green-brown skin glistening under the corridor lights. They carried shock batons and restraint cuffs. Lethal weapons were unnecessary for a freighter crew. Dead hostages invited investigations. Live hostages meant ransom credits. The breach was textbook. Magnetic clamps locked the Iron Maw's boarding collar to the freighter's emergency airlock. Cutting charges blew the seal. 20 Korrathi surged through in a wedge formation that filled the narrow human corridor wall to wall. They were enormous in the cramped space, their bodies built for the crushing depths of swamp water, and the freighter's passageways seemed designed for creatures half their mass. They found the humans on the bridge. 6 of them. Draza'Kol reviewed the feed from the boarding party's helmet cameras and felt nothing that resembled concern. The humans were small, soft-skinned, 2 arms each, no claws, no venom sacs, no dermal plating, no natural weaponry of any kind that his database could identify. One of them, an older female with close-cropped gray hair and steady eyes, stood at the front and told the others to cooperate. Her voice was calm, not frightened calm, Draza'Kol noted distantly, but the calm of someone making a tactical decision. He dismissed the observation as irrelevant. The 6 humans were marched through the boarding collar and into the Iron Maw's brig on Deck 3. Standard containment, an energy barrier across the cell entrance, a shared sanitary facility, and furnishings that consisted of 4 sleeping platforms bolted to the walls. The barrier hummed at a frequency that made the humans wince. Draza'Kol posted 2 guards. He glanced at the prisoners through the security feed, the gray-haired woman, a barrel-chested man with stained hands, a younger woman with dark hair pulled back tight, 2 men of middling age, and a young male who kept clenching and unclenching his fists and turned his attention to the cargo manifest. 48 crates of industrial fabrication components. Decent haul. Worth the fuel expenditure. He forgot about the humans. In the brig, Lena Morrow waited. She stood still and silent with her hands clasped behind her back, while the 2 Korrathi guards settled into the slouched, heavy-lidded posture of creatures who expected nothing to happen. She watched them through the shimmering energy barrier and counted their breathing cycles. 4 minutes passed. 6. At 8 minutes, one guard leaned against the bulkhead. At 12 minutes, the other began picking at something between his crushing teeth with a thick claw. Lena turned to her crew and spoke in a voice so low it barely carried past her own lips. "Okay, here's what we're going to do." Marcus Webb was already examining the energy barrier's emitter housing. The Iron Maw was old. Lena had felt it in the deck plating during the march from the airlock, the subtle vibration of an aging hull. Old ships meant old components. Old components meant gaps. Marcus found his gap where the emitter housing met the bulkhead, a sliver of space, no wider than a fingernail, where thermal cycling had warped the mounting bracket over years of service. He removed his belt, broke the buckle's pin free with a twist that suggested long practice. He held the metal sliver up and caught Lena's eye. She gave him the smallest nod. Marcus reached through the gap. His fingers were too thick to fit, but the pin wasn't. He worked by touch, feeling along the back of the wall panel until he found the diagnostic port's magnetic clasp. Every engineer in known space knew that electronic locks were only as reliable as their cheapest component. The diagnostic port existed so maintenance technicians could troubleshoot the barrier without a full shutdown. The port's security was a magnetic seal rated for casual tampering. Marcus was not casual. The pin found the port's contact leads. He shorted them. The energy barrier flickered. A half-second stutter, the hum dropping in pitch before surging back. Both guards straightened. One approached the barrier, his wide mouth set in a frown, reaching for his communicator. Jin Park hit him. The barrier flickered again, and Jin's fist came through the gap like a piston, catching the guard directly in the throat pouch, the soft cartilaginous tissue that protected the Korrathi's airway. The guard staggered backward, a wet choking sound erupting from his damaged throat, his forearms flailing. He crashed into the opposite wall and slid down it. The second guard lunged forward with a roar that inflated his vocal sac to the size of a melon. Esme Oduya was already in motion. She had positioned herself at the barrier's edge during Marcus's work, and when it flickered a third time, she reached through and ripped the shock baton from the fallen guard's belt with a movement so fluid it looked rehearsed. She rolled sideways as the second guard's massive hand swiped through the space where her head had been, came up on one knee, and drove the baton into the wet skin of his inner forearm. The Korrathi's own biology betrayed him. His stress-secreted skin toxin was an excellent conductor. The electrical discharge traveled across his damp hide like fire across oil. He seized, jerked twice, and collapsed. Marcus shorted the barrier permanently. It died with a descending whine. 14 minutes from belt buckle to freedom. Lena stepped over the unconscious guards and took the second shock baton. "Galley first," she said. Priya Mehta moved to the front of the group. She was the smallest of the six, quiet-voiced, with the kind of precise movements that came from years of working in confined kitchen spaces where every inch mattered. She led them into the service corridor outside the brig, a narrow maintenance passage that ran parallel to the main corridor one deck below. The Iron Maw's crew used it for plumbing access and cable runs. They did not patrol it. Tomas Silva walked at the rear, his eyes tracking every junction, every hatch number, every directional marking on the bulkheads. During the march from the airlock to the brig, while the others had been processing the shock of capture, Tomas had been memorizing. The ship's layout was resolving in his mind like a navigation chart assembling itself from scattered data points. Incomplete, but enough. The galley was on deck 2, near the crew quarters. They reached it without encountering a single pirate. The door was unlocked. Why would it be locked? No one locks a kitchen. Priya walked in, surveyed the space with the focused intensity of a demolitions expert entering an armory, and said, "Because kitchens are where all the weapons are." She moved through the galley with terrifying efficiency. Industrial cooking spray cans, pressurized accelerant, flash point low enough to ignite with a portable heating element, cleaning solvents under the sink. 2 specific bottles that, when their contents were combined in a sealed container and allowed to pressurize through chemical reaction, would produce a gas that burned the eyes and throat of any oxygen-breathing species. Cooking oil in 10-liter drums. Incendiary when atomized and ignited. Slippery as vacuum grease when poured on a floor. And the knives. The Korrathi kitchen knives were designed for four-handed use, heavy, broad-bladed, with long grips meant for 2 hands on each side. In a Korrathi's grip, they were kitchen utensils. In a human's grip, the smaller ones were short swords and the larger ones were 2-handed cleavers. Priya selected 4 and laid them on the prep counter without comment. Marcus had already vanished into the galley's maintenance closet. The sounds emerging from within, clanking, the hiss of disconnected gas lines, a muttered monologue that sounded like a man talking himself through furniture assembly instructions, continued for 20 minutes. He emerged carrying what he'd built. 2 improvised flamethrowers, cooking spray cans fitted with portable igniters stripped from the galley's burner system, rigged so the spray and the ignition were triggered simultaneously. Effective range of roughly 3 meters. He tested neither of them. A chemical smoke bomb, Priya's cleaning agents sealed in a galley canister with a compression valve from the plumbing supplies. Pull the valve, throw the canister, and the gas would vent in a cloud that would clear a corridor of anything that needed to see or breathe. and something he held up with the quiet pride of a man who has exceeded his own expectations. A length of pipe from the galley's gas supply, sealed at one end with a compression fitting packed with cooking gas at pressure, with a delayed release valve at the other end. Lena stared at it. Will it work? Marcus turned it over in his grease-stained hands. It'll definitely do something. Jin picked up the cast-iron skillet from the stove rack. It was enormous by human standards. Sized for Korrathi hands, heavy as a sledgehammer, blackened with years of use. Everyone looked at him. "What?" he said. "It's heavy." They brought the skillet. The team moved toward engineering through the maintenance corridors, Priea's chemical smoke bomb in Esme's hands, Marcus carrying his pipe device with the gentle care of a man holding an unstable infant. They encountered their first patrol at a junction where the maintenance passage crossed a main corridor. 3 Korrathi moving in a loose group, shock batons holstered, talking in the rumbling bass register of their language. Esme raised her fist. Everyone froze. The Korrathi passed the junction without glancing down the maintenance passage. Pirates did not check maintenance corridors on their own ship. Why would they? The threat was outside, always outside. Engineering was 2 decks down, accessible through a service hatch in the floor of a storage compartment. Marcus lifted the hatch and dropped through first. Jin followed. The engine room sprawled below them, a cathedral of humming machinery, conduit bundles thick as tree trunks, and the deep throb of the Iron Maw's reactor core resonating through the deck plates. 2 Korrathi engineers sat at a monitoring station with their backs to the hatch, absorbed in a diagnostic display. Marcus looked at Jin. Jin looked at the skillet. Marcus hefted his wrench. They dropped through together. Jin swung the skillet in a flat arc that connected with the side of the first engineer's skull, with a sound like a cathedral bell being struck with a ham. The engineer toppled sideways off his chair and hit the deck without a sound. The second engineer spun around, vocal sac inflating with alarm, and Marcus's wrench caught him across the jaw. His crushing teeth cracked. He went down. Engineering was theirs. Marcus worked with the focus of a man who had been mentally building this moment since the brig door closed. He sealed the main engineering entrance, the only door large enough for Korrathi to pass through, by welding bulkhead plates across it using the engine room's own maintenance torch. He rerouted the Iron Maw's internal communications through the engineering console, cutting the bridge's ability to coordinate, and then he accessed the atmospheric control system. He could now control the air pressure, temperature, oxygen mix, and fire suppression for every compartment on the ship, independently. From here, Tomas found the security camera network's maintenance terminal and plugged in. The Iron Maw's interior bloomed across 8 screens, corridors, compartments, the bridge, the cargo bay, the brig they'd escaped from. He could see everything. Lena leaned over his shoulder, and for the first time since the capture, she smiled. Now were the ones with a ship. 3 decks above, Draza'Kol was in the cargo bay cataloging the 48th crate when his communicator barked an engineering alert. He keyed the engine room channel. Static, he tried the brig. Static. His secondary eyelids, the translucent membranes that protected his vision underwater, snapped shut reflexively, turning the cargo bay into a pale blur. He forced them open and pulled up the security feed on his personal display. The brig cell was empty. Both guards lay crumpled on the floor. The energy barrier was dead. His vocal sac inflated so fast it made a sound like a wet balloon. His skin flushed with toxin, leaving damp prints on the display's surface that began to corrode the casing. He keyed the ship-wide channel. Intruder alert, the humans have escaped. All hands combat stations. He had 46 operational crew. 6 humans were loose, unarmed, untrained, soft. This would be over in minutes. He sent 4 teams of 5 to sweep the decks. The first team reached engineering and found the door sealed behind welded steel. The team leader reported the obstruction and ordered a cutting tool brought up from storage. The tool never arrived because Marcus, watching on the security feed, triggered the fire suppression system in the corridor outside engineering. The foam was designed for Korrathi biology, non-toxic, breathable, but opaque and olfactory blocking. It flooded the corridor in a torrent of thick white chemical slurry that coated the 5 pirates head to foot, filling their mouths, sealing their eyes, clogging the scent pits along their jaws. They staggered blind, crashing into walls into each other. Then Lena dropped the atmospheric pressure in that corridor by 30%. Not lethal, but the sudden pressure change hit their inner ears like a physical blow. 3 of the 5 dropped to their knees, retching. The other 2 retreated at a stumbling run, trailing foam. Draza'Kol received the report. His grinding teeth produced a sound like gravel being crushed, loud enough that 2 nearby crew members flinched. The humans had engineering. They had atmospheric control. And they were not behaving like prisoners. For the next 3 hours, the Iron Maw became a hunting ground, and the Korrathi were not the hunters. Lena ran the operation from engineering like a conductor directing an orchestra she'd assembled 15 minutes ago. She sent 2-person teams through the maintenance corridors while Thomas guided them via security cameras, his quiet voice feeding directions through the communicators they'd taken from the brig guards. 3 hostiles, Junction 7 Alpha moving starboard, 30-second window. Jin and Esme were the assault team. Jin moved through the ship's crawl spaces with the coiled energy of a man who had been personally offended. They had taken his ship. He was taking theirs. The skillet had become an extension of his arm, heavy enough to buckle Korrathi dermal plating, fast enough in his boxer's hands to connect before the larger aliens could bring their 4 arms to bear. He fought loud. He fought angry. He came through floor hatches and ceiling panels with a yell that echoed through the corridors like something from a nightmare the Korrathi didn't know they could have. Esme fought differently. She cleared rooms. She checked corners. She moved with a practiced economy that drew a quiet look from Lena the first time she saw it on the security feed. Former military. The way she positioned herself in doorways. The way she directed Jin's energy without ever giving an order. Just quiet observations that reshaped his instincts. Don't stand in the doorway. Move in pairs. If you throw it, commit. Jin didn't question her. He'd noticed the change in her movement too, and he had the good sense to follow someone who clearly knew what she was doing. Their third ambush was the one that broke something in the Korrathi. A patrol of 4 pirates had been sent to secure the water reclamation compartment on Deck 4, a strategic choke point between the crew quarters and the cargo bay. Tomas watched them approach on the security feed and murmured the timing into Jin's earpiece. The lights in the corridor died 6 seconds before the patrol entered it. The Korrathi halted, their scent bits flaring in the sudden dark, 4 pairs of arms reaching for weapons. Jin dropped through a ceiling maintenance panel directly onto the lead pirate's shoulders. The skillet connected twice before the Korrathi hit the ground. Esme emerged from a side hatch behind the remaining 3. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The shock baton took the nearest pirate in the kidney cluster, a spot on the Korrathi anatomy that Esme shouldn't have known about, that wasn't in any civilian database. That suggested a history she had never discussed with her crewmates. The pirate folded. The other 2 turned to face her, which meant they turned their backs to Jin. It was over in 9 seconds. Jin leaned against the wall afterward, breathing hard, the skillet resting on his knee. His knuckles were split. A bruise was blooming across his forearm where a Korrathi elbow had caught him. Esme checked his arm, then checked the corridor, then checked his arm again. "You're leading with your shoulders," she said. "I'm leading with the skillet," Jin replied. "Lead with the skillet from your hips. You'll last longer." He looked at her. She looked back with an expression that offered no further explanation. Jin nodded once and they moved on. Priya and Marcus were the sabotage team. Priya deployed her chemical irritant through ventilation ducts serving occupied sections. A thin, acrid mist that turned Korrathi scent pits into screaming clusters of pain and drove pirates out of compartments with their lower hands clamped over their faces. Marcus worked the ship's systems from a portable terminal like a musician playing an instrument. Lights died in corridors seconds before patrols entered them. Gravity plates fluctuated beneath running feet, turning a charging pirate into a tumbling mass of limbs. Doors locked and unlocked in sequences that herded groups of Korrathi into dead-end compartments where the assault team was waiting. Draza'Kol stood on his bridge and listened to the sounds of his ship being taken apart around him. He had stopped sending teams. There was no point. Every team he sent came back diminished, dragged back by their surviving members with concussions, chemical burns, and a haunted quality in their eyes that Draza'Kol found more disturbing than the injuries themselves. His crew were ambush predators, swamp hunters, evolved to grab and crush. They had never been prey. They did not know how to think like prey, and the humans were teaching them a lesson that went deeper than bruises. The Korrathi were stronger. Draza'Kol reminded himself of this as the reports accumulated. Any one of his crew could kill any human aboard in a direct confrontation. The problem was that there were no direct confrontations. The humans refused to stand still. They appeared from impossible angles, struck with improvised weapons that had no right to be effective, and vanished back into the ship's skeleton before the Korrathi could bring their superior mass to bear. Between attacks, there were moments of terrible silence, minutes where nothing happened, where the ship's corridors sat empty, and the security feeds showed nothing but vacant hallways. These silences were worse than the ambushes. Draza'Kol's crew began jumping at ventilation noises. One pirate fired his shock baton at his own shadow. Another refused to enter any corridor that wasn't fully lit, which meant he'd stopped moving entirely because Marcus was cycling the lights ship-wide in randomized patterns. His ship had turned against him. 15 years he'd commanded the Iron Maw, and now her own corridors were hostile. Her own systems obeying someone else's commands. Her own atmosphere weaponized against the crew who breathed it. The skin toxin pooling beneath his feet had begun to leave visible puddles. His vocal sac twitched between inflation and deflation in a rhythm his crew had never seen. Not anger, not dominance. Something closer to an emotion the Korrathi language didn't have a word for, because they'd never needed one. By hour 9, Draza'Kol had 31 operational crew members. The rest were unconscious, restrained with their own cuffs, or locked in compartments with sealed doors and no atmospheric controls. He consolidated everyone in the cargo bay, the largest space on the ship, open sight lines, defensible from every angle. He would hold here. The humans were 6 exhausted civilians running on adrenaline and kitchen equipment. They would tire, they would make a mistake, and then his crew would end this. Lena watched the consolidation on the security feeds. She watched 31 Korrathi pirates crowd into the cargo bay and seal the doors and take up defensive positions around the room's perimeter. She watched Draza'Kol pace at the center, 4 arms gesturing, vocal sac rigid with forced authority, skin leaving a toxic trail on the deck plating. She said, "Good, all in one place." Marcus placed his pipe bomb in the ventilation duct that fed the cargo bay. He triggered the delayed release valve remotely. Compressed cooking gas hissed into the ductwork and began filtering into the cargo bay through 6 ceiling vents. Draza'Kol's atmospheric sensors screamed. Combustible gas, concentration rising. Every Korrathi in the bay went rigid. Energy weapons discharged in a combustible atmosphere would turn the room into a fireball. Lena's voice came through the cargo bay's intercom, measured and unhurried, as if she were announcing a change in the dinner menu. "Attention, unwanted guests. You are currently breathing a cocktail that will ignite if anyone fires an energy weapon. I suggest you put those down. We'll wait." Some of the Korrathi lowered their weapons. Others didn't. Veterans who smelled a bluff, who calculated that 6 humans couldn't possibly have manufactured enough gas to reach true ignition concentrations. Lena had expected this. She told Priya to trigger one of the improvised flamethrowers remotely in the corridor outside the cargo bay's main viewport. The cooking spray ignited in a roaring tongue of orange flame that lit up the viewport like a sun. The Korrathi, who'd been watching the corridor, flinched as the fire bloomed centimeters from the transparent aluminum. Every weapon in the cargo bay hit the floor. Draza'Kol's secondary eyelids sealed shut and did not reopen. He stood in the center of his disarmed crew, blind behind his own reflexive membranes, his vocal sac limp, his skin so saturated with stress toxin that the air around him had become faintly caustic. He could hear his crew's breathing, heavy, afraid. He could hear the gas hissing through the vents. He could hear, somewhere in the distance, footsteps, human footsteps, light, unhurried, coming from every direction. Jin came through the main door first. He was grinning. The skillet rested on his shoulder like a war banner, its surface dented and darkened from impacts that Draza'Kol didn't want to catalog. Esme rose through a floor hatch at the bay's east end, shot baton humming, her eyes scanning the room with a focus that had nothing civilian about it. Marcus and Priya dropped from ceiling grates, landing in crouches that sent the nearest Korrathi stumbling backward. Tomas's voice echoed from the intercom. All exits sealed. Lena walked in last. She came through the primary entrance, carrying nothing. She was smaller than every creature in the room. She looked at 31 disarmed Korrathi pirates, each one capable of crushing her skeleton with a single hand, and her expression held nothing that Draza'Kol, forcing his secondary eyelids open at last, blinking in the harsh light, could identify as fear. "Here's how this works," she said. "You walk to the brig, you walk nicely, and nobody gets the skillet." Jin raised the skillet. It caught the overhead light and gleamed. Draza'Kol calculated. 31 Korrathi, even disarmed, even demoralized, against 6 humans. Mass alone should decide it. But his crew was standing in what they believed was an explosive atmosphere, corralled by their own ship systems, facing humans who had already demonstrated a willingness to set things on fire and an ability to turn any object within reach into something that caused pain. He looked at his crew. He saw wide eyes, half-inflated vocal sacs, skin glistening with involuntary toxin. He saw pirates who had spent the last 9 hours being hunted through their own ship by creatures a third their size. His vocal sac deflated completely. It pressed flat against his throat, a wrinkled, empty pouch. The Korrathi expression of absolute surrender. He walked. His crew followed. 31 pirates marched through their own corridors to their own brig by 6 civilians. Jin brought up the rear with a skittle out on his shoulder. He was whistling a tune that had no melody Draza'Kol could identify, just a shapeless, cheerful noise that bounced off the bulkheads like mockery. The energy barrier hummed to life. Draza'Kol stood behind it, looking out through the shimmering field at the ship that was no longer his. Lena was already on the bridge. Draza'Kol could hear her voice through the intercom, coordinating with Thomas on navigation and Marcus on engineering, her tone shifting from combat commander to merchant captain with the ease of someone changing clothes. Marcus's voice drifted up from engineering, narrating his assessment of the Iron Maw's systems with the professionally offended tone of an engineer, encountering someone else's substandard maintenance. Load-bearing strut hasn't been inspected in years. Reactor coolant is 3 months overdue for cycling. You're lucky this thing didn't blow a seal in the middle of a raid. Priya was in the galley. Draza'Kol could smell cooking. Actual cooking. Not chemical weapons, but food. The adrenaline had worn off and the humans were hungry. She was using his galley, his ingredients, his stove, to feed the crew that had just stolen his ship, using the contents of that same kitchen. Jin sat outside the brig on an overturned crate, eating something from the cast-iron skillet. He'd cleaned it. The weapon that had felled a dozen Korrathi was now a serving dish. Jin ate with the unself-conscious satisfaction of a man who had done a hard day's work and earned his meal. Draza'Kol watched him through the barrier. His skin toxin had reached a concentration that was making his own scent pits burn and his eyes water. He had commanded the Iron Maw for 15 years. He had raided 214 vessels. His reputation spanned 3 sectors. He asked through the barrier, his vocal sac barely inflating enough to carry the words, "How?" Jin chewed, thought about it, shrugged with the boneless ease of a creature that had 2 arms and apparently no concept of defeat. "You put us in a room and forgot about us. My mom always said, never leave bored people alone in a room with tools. They'll either fix something or break something." He scooped another bite. We did both. Draza'Kol's grinding teeth produced no sound. He had nothing left to grind. A Galactic patrol responded to the distant shore's automated distress beacon 18 hours later and found the Iron Maw drifting in open space, fully operational, transmitting on a standard civilian frequency. The patrol commander, a Thesari with iridescent scales and the perpetually exhausted expression of a bureaucrat who had seen everything, boarded expecting a hostage crisis and instead found a human woman sitting in the captain's chair, drinking a dark liquid from a ceramic mug and looking thoroughly at home. He asked what happened. Lena gave him the short version. The Sari commander stared at her for a long time, the kind of stare that recalculates an entire species assessment in real time. He asked where their weapons were. Lena gestured at the galley. She gestured at the engineering closet. She gestured at Jin, who had followed them to the bridge and was still carrying the skillet. The commander looked at the skillet. He looked at the brig full of Korrathi pirates visible on the security monitor. He looked back at the skillet. "I'm going to need a very detailed report," he said. "You'll want to talk to Priya," Lena replied, taking another sip. "She's the one who weaponized the kitchen." Draza'Kol's after-action deposition to the Galactic courts became the most downloaded legal document in the history of interstellar piracy. In 17 pages of testimony, transcribed by a court recorder who had to pause twice to compose herself, he described in excruciating detail how he and 47 armed pirates were outwitted, outfought, and systematically humiliated by 6 unarmed human civilians using kitchen equipment, a belt buckle, and a cast-iron cooking implement that one of them had apparently bonded with. The presiding judge, a Korrathi elder whose species prided itself on judicial composure, asked Captain Draza'Kol if he had any recommendations for future encounters with human cargo crews. Draza'Kol sat in the witness dock, his skin still leaking toxin in thin rivulets that pooled on the polished floor, his vocal sac twitching with residual trauma, his secondary eyelids flickering open and shut in a pattern that the court's behavioral analyst later described as acute post-traumatic stress. He was quiet for a long time. "Do not capture them," he said. "Do not contain them. Do not, under any circumstances, leave them unsupervised near a kitchen." He paused. His vocal sac inflated and deflated 3 times in rapid succession, the Korrathi equivalent of a full-body shudder. "And if you see one carrying a cooking implement," he said, "run." The court record noted that the gallery erupted in what the transcript described as mixed-species vocalization consistent with involuntary amusement. Draza'Kol did not find it funny. He was sentenced to 12 years in a rehabilitation facility, where he reportedly refused to enter the communal dining hall for the first 3 months. The MV Distant Shore was recovered and returned to her crew. The Iron Maw was impounded, stripped, and sold at auction. Jin Park put in a bid for the skillet, which had been logged as evidence. The court denied his request. He bought another one at the next station. Lena didn't ask why he kept it in the cockpit. "Some tools are just too good to put away,"